Hi folks, hope you're okay today. Sent invitations out if anybody's interested in joining. I just want to look at an article and read bits of it here and there and let people share their thoughts or my thoughts as well. The article is published by Philip van der Elst on bethinking.org, From Atheism to Christianity, a Personal Journey. Philip van der Elst, and he writes, "Do you find it difficult to believe in God or accept the claims of Christianity? I did when I was an atheist, but I changed my mind, and my reasons for doing so may be of interest to you in your own personal journey and attempts to make sense of life. I'm a freelance writer and lecturer since graduating from Oxford in 1973 with a degree in politics and philosophy. I spent most of my professional life in politics and journalism, loving as I do the world of books, ideas and debate. Two questions in particular have always interested me. Is there a God? And if there is, what is the connection between them? Growing up in a non-Christian family with intellectually gifted but unbelieving parents, I used to think that belief in God and the supernatural had been discredited by the advance of science and was incompatible with liberty, religious faith, and seemed to me to involve the blind worship of a cosmic dictator and the abandonment of reason in favor of revelation. Why, in any case, should I take religion seriously? I thought when the existence of evil and suffering clearly discredited the Christian claim that our world owed its existence to a benevolent creator. My skepticism and hostility towards Christianity, which developed in my teens under the influence of thinkers like Ayn Rand and Bertrand Russell, grew even stronger while I was at Oxford. Then, at the age of 24, I met my turned out to be a Christian. Shocked by the discovery that this highly intelligent and beautiful woman was one of them, I determined to find out whether there was any good evidence for the existence of God and the truthfulness of Christianity, making it quite clear from the outset, however, that I was not prepared to become a believer just to cement our relationship. I started to read C.S. Lewis, whose Chronicles of Narnia I had enjoyed as a child. I did so for three reasons. First, because he had himself been an atheist and might therefore be able to answer my many questions and objections. Secondly, because I respected his intellect. Here was a man who had graduated from Oxford with triple first-class honours in classics, philosophy and English, and had then become one of the greatest British academics of his generation. If he could have made the journey from atheism to Christianity, mistaken in thinking that you had to bury your brain in order to believe in God. Furthermore, and this was my third reason for studying his writing, you couldn't accuse C.S. Lewis of being glib or shallow about suffering, having lost his mother at the age of 10, being unhappy at school, and then gone on to experience the horrors of trench warfare during the First World War. He was obviously only too aware of the problem of evil. His discussion of these issues would surely, I thought, be illuminating. This proved to be the case. As I read Lewis' three most important books, Mere Christianity, Miracles and the Problem of Pain, I found myself not only following in the footsteps of a person who had wrestled with all the issues that were troubling me, I was also discovering intelligent and convincing answers to all my doubts. I think what comes to my mind here is this guy had studied and yet it didn't dawn on him till later on that there were people who were just as educated, who were believers, and that caused cognitive dissonance in him and encouraged him to move over to Christianity by studying the Christian works. And very often the media and those who are criticizing Christianity paint Christians as if they're anti-intellectual, and it's not fair to do that. And if they would just have a look at Christianity, they would see that just as on the skeptical side there are great thinkers, on the Christian side there are great thinkers also. He goes on, since my own father had died when I was only 17, I found what Lewis had to say about the problem of evil particularly pertinent. As he rightly points out, we cannot complain about the existence of evil and suffering and use that as an argument against the existence and goodness of God, unless we first believe that the standard of right and wrong by which we judge and condemn our world is an objective one. Our sense of justice and fairness has to be a true insight into reality before we can be justified in getting angry and indignant about all the pain and injustice we see around us. But if this is the case, what explains the existence within us of this inner moral code of compass? According to atheism, human beings and all their thinking process are simply the accidental byproducts of the mindless movement of atoms within an undesigned, random, and purposeless universe. We attach any ultimate meaning or truth to our thoughts and feelings, including our sense of justice. They have on view no more validity or significance than the sound of wind in the trees. I think that's a profound and bang-on statement to make, really. I do think that I can't understand how an atheist could answer that, but I think what they do is they start to talk about, well, what do you mean by random, undesigned? What do you mean by purposeless universe? It's only what we know at the present time, and we don't know, so just because we don't know doesn't mean it's right. And they play all those kind of games. But it's very simple. How can you be judgmental against the Bible? That implies that you've got some universal standard. Well, where did that universal standard come from? So atheism is self-refuting. He goes, on the other hand, we refuse to accept this conclusion, insisting, for example, that it is always and objectively true that you should love your neighbor and you shouldn't torture children. We are led away from atheism. The presence within us of an objective moral law written on our hearts points instead to the existence of an eternal goodness and intelligence which created us and our universe, enables us to think, and is the eternal source of our best and deepest values. In other words, Lewis argues, atheism cuts its own throat philosophically, because it discredits all human reasoning, including the arguments for atheism. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning, just as if there were no light in the universe, and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be a word without meaning. Boy, I think that's pretty, actually. I think that quote is very profound. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. But as if there were no light in the universe, and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. Dark would be a word without meaning. Wow. And I think, I know an atheist call this, they kind of say, oh, well, it's a paradox. It's some kind of paradox, or it's some kind of philosophical problem. But it's not just a philosophical problem, and it's not just a paradox. It does contradict your own position. When you say moral standards, absolute moral standards, and you're using a moral standard, absolute moral standard, to say there are no absolute moral standards. Not all atheists take that position. Some atheists do believe that there are moral absolutes, but most of them tend to go that morality is relative. And I think that moral relativism is the the logical conclusion of atheism. How do you get meaning from non-meaning? How do you get moral objective truth? I don't know. It's just 1 minute. About afternoon would be all right. About 2 o'clock. All right. Yes, right, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. My dad was just ringing, just wishing me Happy New Year. So yeah, we the whole universe has no meaning. We should never have found out that it has no meaning. End of argument, really, isn't it? I think that's just an amazing argument, really. Anyway, the guy goes on, but if God is goodness personified and therefore as our creator, the divine source of all that is good, true, and beautiful, why is there so much evil and suffering? What has gone wrong? The Christian answer to that question, Lewis argues, is that our world has been damaged by rebellion against God. An originally good creation has been spoiled. If you find this hard to believe, consider the evidence. Look at all the many examples there are and intricate design in nature. The nest building instincts of birds, the incredibly complex structure of the human brain, the navigational system of bats and whales, the biological software of DNA in every cell of our bodies, sexual reproduction, etc. All this exists side by side with harmful viruses, diseases, and death. Can its obvious implications be ignored? Consider too the significance of the fact that human beings possess an inner moral code they cannot get rid of yet seem unable to obey. Does all this not suggest some process of deterioration from hopeful beginnings? Is it not also significant that many ancient peoples and cultures, including the Chinese, have some tradition of a last paradise in the dim and distant past? Speaking for myself, I find this evidence convincing, but what has really persuaded me of the truthfulness of the Christian explanation of suffering is its inherent philosophical credibility. As C.S. Lewis points out, true love is a voluntary union of free individuals giving themselves to each other for their mutual delight and for the mutual enjoyment of life and all its blessings. Consequently, when God created the first human being, he gave them the gift of free will. He did so in order that they and all their descendants might share his life, his love, his joy, and his beauty with him and with each other. As part of this gift of free will, God also gave human beings creativity and intelligence in order that they might be good stewards of the word in which he had placed them, sharing its joys and adding to its wonder and beauty. But the problem with free will is that it can be corrupted and misused. Our inner freedom to relate to God and other people in harmony and love can be turned on its head. We can choose instead to reject our Creator and live only. And that, sadly, is what has happened to the human race. It is what lies behind the famous biblical story of the fall of man. Our ancestors disobeyed God with deadly consequences for themselves and posterity. For this reason, I have already mentioned, I have no doubt that the fall of man was a real historical event. But what gives the whole story its ring of truth is its totally convincing picture of the disastrous consequences of turning away from God. A creature rebelling against its creator, Lewis argued, is like a plant refusing to grow towards the sunlight. It results in a broken relationship which separates the creature from the eternal source. I think that argument is a fair argument, really, and I think it's a good argument, and I don't think people should shy away from it. Often this argument's used and skeptics will denigrate it and debunk it, and Christians are afraid to use it. But it's a very powerful argument, and it's in relation to what Christianity is. Christianity is about the Trinity, and we were made in the image of God to have relationships, and that's what the Trinity is all about. It's relational, and we are to be relational. And we rebelled against God, and that broke relationship with God, and it broke relationship with each other. Now, ultimately, in time, why God allowed ultimately sin and evil in the world, we can never fully know. But we do have a basic structure where we can understand some things, and some things that we do understand is there could be no creation without the opportunity for the human race to choose whether to have a relationship with God or not. Adam and Eve disobeyed, they chose not to. That sent the rest of us into chaos. It brought sin in the world. And I think, I do think that the freedom of the will argument about Adam and Eve is fine. I don't see any problem with that. It doesn't answer fully everything, but who can answer every question? Re-examining my objections to the supernatural and miracles. Once again, however, Lewis' writings forced me to re-examine my objections to Christianity and the historical claims about Jesus on which it is based. And he points out in his brilliant book, Miracles, you cannot rule out the supernatural on scientific ground without first beginning the question of God's existence. Atheism denies natural by definition. But if atheism is false and God exists, who is to say that God is not able to intervene in his creation? If a human author can change the ending of one of her plays or novels at the broke of a keyboard, then surely the Creator in whose image we are made can alter the natural environment and reverse the progress of a disease, conquer death, or what we consider miraculous. In any case, argues Lewis, the whole idea that it's somehow unscientific to believe in God and therefore the possibility of miracle is both historically and philosophically mistaken. Modern science owes its very origin to monotheistic religion. To quote Lewis, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. That is why most of the great founding fathers of modern science believed in God and were Christians who took the Bible. To mention just a few of them, we remember Pascal, Boyle, etc. Lewis not only persuaded me, says the writer, there is no reason to disbelieve in miracles and the supernatural on scientific grounds. He also pointed out the absurdity of attributing all belief in miracles to ignorance of the natural laws revealed by science. Jesus' contemporaries in first century Palestine may have lacked the knowledge of modern physics, but they were perfectly well aware that his virgin birth or his instances healing of lepers were events which went against the normal course of nature. Otherwise, they would have regarded them as miracles. Joseph, as we are told in Matthew's Gospel, was resolved to break off his engagement to Mary precisely because he knew, as well as you and I do, that women don't usually become pregnant without first having sex with a man. In responding to this challenge, we look with an open mind at the accounts in the New Testament of the miracles of Jesus. Lewis argues we are brought face to face with an interesting and significant fact. Instead of finding there the stuff of fairy tales, talking animals or frogs turning into princes, we are confronted with something much more rational and believable. What we see in most of Jesus' miracles is what God does in the natural world as its creator, but localizes it and speeds it up. Thus every year, for example, tiny seedlings of grain created by God grow into vast harvest fields of wheat and thousands of loaves of bread. The same process of multiplication took place in Jesus' feeding of the 5,000, but localized and speeded up. Similarly, God is always turning water into wine by the action of sunlight and rain on the fruit of the vine, and by the in all stages of winemaking. Quote, he goes on, in addition to convincing me of the inherent reasonableness of the New Testament record of Jesus' miracles, Lewis' writings also help me understand why the Christian concept of God as a union of three persons within one Godhead, the Trinity, made sense, and why God the Son, the second person of that Trinity, had to come down into our world as Jesus to die for our sins and conquer death on our behalf. As Lewis explains in the most readable book, Mere Christianity, God is love personified since as our creator. He is the divine source and origin of all human and animal love. But since love involves relationship between people, we should not be altogether surprised to discover that God in his own being is a loving union of three described in the New Testament as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It is of course true that this revelation may at first appear startling and strange, but it does not seem unreasonable once you think about it. The same thing applies to the apparently perplexing and contradictory notion of unity and diversity. How can God be a union of three in one? Well, says Lewis, what appears to be an impossibility in our dimension of being is not necessarily an impossibility in God's dimension of being. And it goes on, evidence for the truthfulness of the New Testament. Persuaded by Lewis of the reasonableness of the Christian message, I then examined the evidence for the historical truthfulness of the gospel records. Once again, closer scrutiny of the facts forced me to abandon my old prejudice against Christianity. The first thing that I noticed was the internal evidence for the truthfulness of the gospel accounts. Far from being self-serving propaganda, the Gospels faithfully record the weaknesses and failings of Jesus' disciples. So that's an article by From Atheism to Christianity, A Personal Journey by Philip van der Elst, bethinking.org. And the thought that comes to me there in reading that, the thought that comes to me is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. That's what the thought comes to me, is that is that as an atheist, what happened is as soon as he started to look at material that challenged him, he was willing to allow cognitive dissonance to take place in his life. You know, he was willing to read Lewis. He was willing to listen to what Lewis had to say. And because he was willing and open, God was able to speak to him. He'd begin to open up and realize that this atheism that he'd held on to was not as logical or as sound as it first made itself out to be. Yeah, so I think the question that I would ask to atheists is, are you really open? Are you really open to God? To those who are skeptics, are you really open, or are you just closing your mind? And if you're just closing your mind, well, you're never going to find the truth. You know, if you don't want to find the truth, if you don't want to find the meaning, then you'll never find it. And many of you just don't want to find the truth. You've decided already in your head, and you're not open to new data. And no matter how much people argue with you, you're never going to come to know God because you're not open to the data. So the question is, are you open to the data? And if you are, then you'll begin to see that atheism is not logically possible, really. I want to look at an article by Aaron Brake. And Aaron Brake has written an article called "The Minimal Facts of the Resurrection." And I want to talk about that now and share my thoughts about that. The minimal fact of approach to the resurrection. He goes, the approach I will take in this paper is commonly referred to as the minimal fact approach. He talks about 12 minimal facts that we can know. He writes, before looking at the facts surrounding the death of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, it's important to identify a set of objective criteria by which the validity of historical events may be judged. In other words, what criteria may be used to establish of an event with reasonable historical certainty. New Testament scholars Gary Habermas and Michael Licona list the following 5 criteria. Number 1, historical claims are strong when supported by multiple independent sources. Number 2, historical claims which are also attested by the enemies are more likely to be authenticated since enemies are unsympathetic and often hostile witnesses. 3, historical claims which include embarrassing admission reflect honest reporting rather than creative storytelling. 4, historical claims are strong when supported by eyewitness testimony. 5, historical events claims which are supported by early testimony are more reliable and less likely to be the result of legendary development. So skeptics investigate of Jesus cannot. Some skeptics argue the resurrection of Jesus cannot be investigated historically, but this is a mistake. The facts surrounding the resurrection are of historical nature and available for anyone to examine. Consequently, the meaning of the resurrection is a theological matter, but the fact of the resurrection is a historical matter. Thus, either the bodily resurrection of Jesus actually occurred in history or it did not. Either the resurrection is the best explanation of the known historical data or it is not. Regardless, what we cannot do is simply dismiss it as supernatural or miraculous in an attempt to remove it from the pool of obvious a priori. Moreover, we need to be careful not to confuse the evidence for the resurrection with the best explanation for the evidence. The resurrection of Jesus is a miraculous explanation evidence, but the evidence itself is not miraculous. So there are some basic facts, but before we do that, I want to read the quote. Just want to read a quote. John Warwick Montgomery, History, Law and Christianity, Edmonton, Canadian Institute for Law, Theology and Public Policy, 2002. The only way, he says, can we know whether an event can occur is to see whether, in fact, it has occurred. The problem of miracles, then, must be solved in the realm of historical investigation, philosophical speculation. And note that a historian, in facing an alleged miracle, is really facing nothing new. All historical events are unique, and the test of their factual character can be only accepted documentary approach that we have to follow here. No historian has the right to a closed system or natural causation. And there are a number of facts that we can verify about Jesus. The death of Jesus by crucifixion. Perhaps no other fact surrounding the life of the historical Jesus is better attested than his death by crucifixion. Not only is the crucifixion account included in every gospel narrative, but it is also confirmed by several non-Christian sources. These include the Jewish historian Josephus, the Roman historian Tacitus, the Greek Samosa, as well as the Jewish Talmud. Josephus tells us that Pilate, at the suggestion of principal men among us, condemned him to the cross. From a perspective of historiography, Jesus' crucifixion meets the historical criteria of multiple independent and early eyewitness sources, including enemy attestation. John Dominic Crossan, a non-Christian critical scholar and co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, states that he was crucified is as sure as any historical event can be. The empty tomb. I just read a bit because I'm getting a bit tired. Something happened to the body of Jesus. Of this we can be sure. Not only was Jesus publicly executed in Jerusalem, but his post-mortem appearance and empty tomb were first publicly proclaimed there. This would have been impossible with a decaying corpse in the tomb. It would have been wholly un-Jewish, notes William Lane Craig, not to say foolish, to believe that a man was raised from the dead when his body was still in the grave. The Jewish authorities had plenty of motivation to produce a body and silence these men who turned the world upside down, effectively ending the Christian religion for good. But no one could. The only early opposing theory recorded by the enemies of Christianity is that the disciples stole the body. Ironically, this presupposes the empty tomb. In addition, 4 gospel narratives attest to the burial of Jesus by Joseph of Arimathea and place woman as the primary witness to the empty tomb. Both of these are highly unlikely to be Christian inventions. First, with regard to Joseph of Arimathea, biblical scholar James J. Dunn explains that he is a very character. He's attested in all 4 Gospels and in the Gospels of Peter, when the tendency of the tradition was to shift the blame to the Jewish council. The creation ex nihilo of a sympathizer from among their number would be surprising, and Arimathea, a time very difficult to identify and reminisce of no scriptural symbolism, makes a thesis for invention even more implausible. So I'd have a look at the article, The Minimal Facts of the Resurrection by Aaron Brake, and you'll find that information helpful. So we've basically come to the end, and I think the good thing about this minimal fact approach is it uses secular historical methodology or historiography. And the basic facts of the Christian can be verified using the criteria of history that historians use. So those are my thoughts there. I think in terms of my own journey, I'm constantly reading and studying stuff, and I'm struck how the best evangelical scholars do deal with the scholarly criticisms against Christianity. People like J.P. Morland, William Lane Craig, R.C. Sproul, um, many others, Phil Fernandez. I'm struck that they do actually grapple with the skeptics and they fairly dismantle those arguments. I think in my own life, over the last 20 years, I've grown stronger in my faith. I mean, a lot of the skeptics have attacked the Bible that I've met, and I've not grown weaker, but I've grown stronger by those attacks because it makes you study the Bible more and look into things. So in this new year, I would encourage you to stay strong in your faith, to study, to keep strong, keep the faith, and not be discouraged. To know that there are atheists coming to know Jesus, coming to know Him as Lord and Savior, and to the atheist out there, there are people who were atheists and but moved over to Christianity, and I would have a look at the literature, and this is one article that you can have a look at. So I'm going to go because I'm rather tired, but I wish you all the best, and may the Lord be with you, and may God bless you, and may you have a happy new year today. Nobody's come in today to talk, so we'll just, as I'm tired, I'm full of food and ready to sleep. All right, God bless you, and see you soon.